OG Rose, and today we'll be talking about the Philosophy Portal Science of Logic course, which sign up ends on January 15th, so there's still time, and it is being headed by Cadell, who has already done incredible courses on the phenomenology of spirit, on Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and you can find incredibly useful, profound, and deep resources on his YouTube page from thinkers as varied as Sigmund Freud, Zizek, Zupancha, and many more. You'll also find incredible philosophical dialogues and discussions, and I suggest all of his papers and books as well. The foundations of logic remain unchanged from their ancient root. We still tend to think like Aristotelians, A is A. And it's pretty wild for me personally to go back to Hegel, the science of logic, and to see someone who hundreds of years ago was already thinking these problems, the problems that would come from overfitting Aristotelian logic. And we seem to have glided past Hegel, unfortunately, missed what he was trying to teach us. The science of logic was published, I think it's around 1812, 1814, and in 2022, over 200 years later, I think it's time for us to think of Hegel as a contemporary. We have not negated and sublated yet A thinking into AB thinking, as I like to call it, which is my shorthand for the ontoepistemology of Hegel. And as a result, we've been stuck trying to apply AA thinking to totalizing visions, which has given us the horrors of modernity. But then we've deconstructed AA and really had nothing to replace it with, thus the problems of postmodernity. There is now a rising metamodernity, which, if we follow Mr. Dimber, is an oscillation primarily between postmodernity and modernity, which perhaps is a different meaning of the term than what we see on the liminal web, which seems to have more to do with emergence, more to do with complexity theory, and things like that. Now, whatever the virtues of these movements might be, and there are indeed virtues of them, I personally am very interested in what I call the modern counter-enlightenment, which I think was a line of thinking that was completely missed or overlooked. When I say completely missed, I don't mean to say no one knew about them and that nobody read them. But they did not, I suppose, fit easily in the dominant thought of the day, so they remained on the outskirts. The dominant thought of the day was totalizing visions, complete systems, say when Blondel is alive. Before Kurt Gödel, there are still dreams of works like the Principia Mathematica succeeding. And so anyone like a Florensky or Korbusca that kind of suggested that these projects are problematic were laughed out of the room, were just not taken seriously. Now, it turns out they may have been very prescient. What amazes me is that Hegel seems to be a founding text in this work back in 1810, that he saw so far into the future that he could tell that there would be shortcomings to modernity and postmodernity, and that it was very important we did not get stuck just moving back and forth between those two. This is where I think we see Hegel be a speculative thinker, not just a dialectical thinker. And that speculative thinking gives rise to the new logic we see in Hegel. Getting a hold on this logic, I am convinced, is of the utmost importance for our globalized, pluralized, diverse, complex, and increasingly singularized toward a singularity, technological singularity. I'm increasingly convinced that our world, defined by those movements, very much needs a logic that moves beyond the simple category of being into becoming, but then even beyond autonomous becoming into something more profound than that. This is what Hegel works toward. And the hope of the course is to help other people and those interested to be prepared for what's coming by returning to this foundational text and walking through it. Dr. Cadell will describe this. He says that Hegel's science of logic is an attempt to reinvent our understanding of logic to the standards of the modern scientific universe, bringing the tools of science to the nature of our subjectivity itself. And I've heard him also describe this as a quantum logic. And this course is designed to open a window into how Hegel's philosophical reinvention can mature intellectual growth and self-reflection. And some of what I'm saying are descriptions found on the course description on philosophyportal.online itself. And so you can read the full description there. And the class will aim to provide a detailed introduction to this work and sense make the science of logic in relation to the personal and professional life of students who are interested. Logic is funny because nobody thinks they're not logical. If we thought that way, we would change how we thought. So there's always a problem with logic in that we necessarily experience it in terms of not needing to be updated. And this is why we're in danger, frankly. We don't really see a need. And that partly will explain, I think, why we haven't updated logic since Aristotle, because we don't naturally experience ourselves as needing to update logic. And arguably, I mentioned this in my talk to Cadell on his channel regarding the counter-Enlightenment, Hegel would have us think in terms of overfitting and underfitting, which are computer science terms that I may not be using technically correct, but I think they're useful terms. Hegel would have us use that language instead of right and wrong. And I think that's a useful language. Because in Hegel, thought develops historically through periods and so on. And so Aristotle has fit rightly and right enough for a very long time. So there really hasn't been a need to update logic. And perhaps we could even say that we haven't needed to update logic until now, right now. And thus, perhaps Hegel came too early. Now, that could be argued against because of the terrors and horrors of the 20th century, and that therefore we would have been better off had we taken Hegel seriously and not merely read him through totalitarian visions like in Marx. But that is an argument for another time. And also, there's something about human beings that doesn't seem like we're very good at changing before experiences. So perhaps it just simply was not possible for us to really take seriously the science of logic until all other options had been exhausted and we experienced that exhaustion. It's one thing to know an exhaustion, entirely something else to experience it. Well, the world today feels very exhausted. It feels as if it thinks philosophy is over. People declare it right, left and right. And there's a certain acceptance of the inevitability of AI to replace human beings. It feels as if all is lost, frankly. It feels like the economy is collapsing. It feels like globalization is unsustainable, Duginism, all of these movements that are occurring. Well, it is precisely in this moment, this terrible moment, arguably, that Hegel would have us realize that progress can occur. And I think that's an important element of progress in Hegel that Cadell has mentioned. In Hegel, progress is a coming to terms with greater and greater tension, greater and greater problems, and greater paradox. Progress is not an escaping of tension, but a facing of greater tension. And that means that progress occurs through a process of us coming to handle greater tension. Now, this is existential tension, because arguably we don't have to do the same manual labor as people in the past do. But tension, existential tension, is very, very difficult. And I don't think it would be wise to create hierarchies between which difficulty is better or worse, between manual and mental. Mental anguish is quite difficult. That all aside, the idea is that mankind's greatest opportunities for progress tend to occur precisely at the moments when it seems progress cannot happen anymore, where progress has run out. I think if we are to see this difficult moment as indeed a road to something greater and something more, then taking Hegel seriously is paramount. Returning to Hegel's science of logic is quintessential, and Cadell Last is offering that opportunity starting January 15th. So please sign up today. For more by Cadell Last, please visit philosophyportal.online. Please sign up for the class. Please check out his content and material. And thank you so much for your time.